Mr. Wright, your mother is suing you for half of your grandfather's $4 million inheritance. The bailiff's words echoed through the entrance of my Charleston home like a gunshot in the morning silence. I was holding a cup of steaming coffee, watching the last red hibiscus flowers in the garden my grandfather planted 3 decades ago. The same woman who abandoned me at 6 months old now wanted half of what he left me. I signed for the documents with perfectly steady hands, thanked him politely, and closed the door. It was only when the sound of the officer's footsteps faded away on the sidewalk that I allowed a cold smile to curve my lips. My name is Leo Wright, I am 32 years old, and I have just received the most pathetic declaration of war in history. Celeste Wright, my biological mother, apparently decided that 3 decades of total absence entitled her to $4 million. The same woman who never sent a birthday card, never called when I broke my arm at age 8, never showed up at my law school graduation. Now she wanted her share of Judge Franklin Cole's inheritance. My grandfather. The man who raised me from infancy when she and my father decided that parental responsibility was too heavy a burden to bear. I walked to the office where the law school graduation photo still held pride of place on the shelf. Grandpa Franklin stood beside me, proud, in his black robe and that smile he reserved for special moments. Grandma June would have loved to be there, but cancer took her 2 years earlier. They had been my real family for 32 years. And now Celeste thought she could just show up and claim half of everything we had built together. I opened the legal documents on the mahogany desk that had belonged to Grandpa. The case was well-founded, obviously prepared by expensive lawyers. Allegations of elder manipulation, undue influence, and forced family abandonment. Every word was a calculated lie. But as I read the accusations, I felt something different from what Celeste probably expected. It wasn't anger or despair. It was a cold, meticulous satisfaction. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. Because during all my years as an estate planning attorney, I had learned one fundamental thing: those who abandon a child leave traces. And those traces, when properly documented, tell a very different story from the one she intended to sell to the court. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of the best family lawyer in Charleston. Amelia Santos? This is Leo Wright. I need your help with a case that's going to be interesting. As I waited for her to answer, I looked out at the garden again. The red hibiscus swayed gently in the morning breeze, just as Grandma June always said they would, continuing to bloom long after the people who planted them were gone. If you're enjoying this story of family, betrayal, and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how this legal battle will unfold. Because Celeste Wright was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between being a biological mother and being a real family. And when she found out what I had kept hidden all these years, it would be too late to back down. Amelia Santos answered the phone while I looked at an old photo that Grandpa Franklin kept on his desk. Me at 2 years old, running through the garden while Grandma June watered the hibiscus. No sign of Celeste or my father Gavin in the dozens of photos scattered around the house. Leo, I just read the documents you emailed me. That woman has guts, I'll give her that. Celeste Wright. 49 years old, divorced 3 times, currently living in Miami with her 4th husband, a 60-year-old businessman she met on a cruise 6 months ago. My private investigation had been quick and revealing. She claimed in the lawsuit that my grandfather had deliberately distanced her and my father from me, creating a hostile environment that forced them to keep their distance for the sake of their son. The narrative painted Franklin and June as manipulators who used an innocent child to blackmail the biological parents. Every word was a meticulously constructed lie. Amelia, you need to see something. I'm sending it now. I opened the file I had been compiling for the past 5 years, ever since I started practicing family law. A complete dossier on Celeste and Gavin Wright, including bank records, correspondence, and documentation they never imagined I would have access to. Because while they lived their lives pretending I didn't exist, I became exactly the kind of lawyer they should fear. My God, Leo. Did they receive money from your grandfather? $3,200 a month, for 22 years. $92,800 total, adjusted for inflation. My voice was clinical, professional. They never missed a payment. They never sent a picture of me. They never asked if I was sick, if I needed anything, if I was doing well in school. The silence on the other end of the line lasted for long seconds. Celeste had built her petition on the claim that Franklin had financially cut her off from the family. That she had fought desperately to keep in touch with me, but was prevented from doing so by a controlling and possessive grandfather. Lies. All of them. I had copies of the cancelled checks. I had bank statements showing that she religiously deposited every penny he sent. I also had something she definitely didn't expect: the letters. Dozens of them, written by Grandma June over 3 decades, all returned unanswered. Leo Deer scored his first goal in soccer today. Photo attached. Leo got top marks in math. The teacher said he has a special talent. Leo asked when his mom is coming to visit him. I didn't know what to say. Each letter returned with a stamp moved, address unknown, even when June sent them to the address listed on the checks deposited that same week. She was deliberately avoiding contact, I muttered, leafing through the letters yellowed by time. But what really gave me that cold satisfaction was the other file. The one Celeste had no idea existed. Because during all those years, while she was building her new life in Miami, spending the money my grandfather sent her religiously, I became a lawyer specializing in inheritance law. And inheritance lawyers know exactly how to investigate the financial past of people who contest wills. Celeste Wright had a history. A pattern. 3 divorces, all involving property disputes. 2 previous attempts to contest the wills of distant relatives. A lawsuit against her own mother over a house in Tampa that she lost due to family abandonment. She wasn't a remorseful mother trying to reconnect with her son. She was a professional inheritance litigator who saw a $4 million opportunity. Leo, I need to ask you something difficult, Amelia hesitated. How do you feel about this? Emotionally, I mean. I looked back at the photo on the table. That 2-year-old boy running through the garden didn't know he was being abandoned. He didn't know he would spend his entire life building defenses against rejection he didn't understand. But the 32-year-old man sitting in that chair knew exactly what to do with that pain. I feel prepared, Amelia. For the first time in my life, I feel completely prepared. Because Celeste Wright had made a fundamental mistake. She assumed I was just the orphan grandson of a dead judge, easily intimidated by lawsuits and allegations of manipulation. She had no idea she was facing someone who had spent 32 years studying family abandonment. Someone who had turned his own rejection into a professional specialty. And by the time she discovered the kind of lawyer I really was, by the time she saw the documentation I had collected on her over the years, it would be too late to back down. But first, I needed her to feel confident. I needed her to believe she was winning. Because the most devastating fall always comes after the feeling of victory. The first hearing was scheduled for the following week, but Celeste didn't wait that long to begin her campaign of destruction. On Monday, I found a message from her on my answering machine. It was no longer the distant, professional voice of the legal proceedings. It was personal, manipulative, with that fake motherly tone she had never used with me when I really needed a mother. Leo dear, I know you're getting bad advice about our family situation. But you need to understand that I'm your mother, and all I want is for our family to be reconciled. It doesn't have to be this way, son. Son. The word sounded like a cruel joke after 32 years of silence. But it was on Wednesday that she showed her true colors. Amelia called me, upset. Leo, you need to see this right now. Celeste had given an interview to the Charleston Herald. The headline screamed, "Desperate Mother Fights Manipulative Son for Family Inheritance." The story she told was a masterpiece of fiction. According to her version, she had fought tirelessly to maintain contact with me, but my grandfather had systematically sabotaged all her efforts. She painted Franklin as a controlling and possessive man who used an innocent child as an emotional weapon against his biological parents. He told me I wasn't good enough to be Leo's mother, she cried to the reporter. That I needed to prove my worth before I could see him. Meanwhile, he was filling my son's head with lies about me. Every word was a calculated stab at the memory of the man who raised me. But the worst was yet to come. In the interview, Celeste claimed that I had inherited my grandfather's manipulative nature, and was repeating the same pattern of control by denying her access to what was rightfully hers by maternal right. He learned from the best, she sighed. Franklin turned my own son against me, and now Leo is doing the same thing to me. I finished reading the article sitting on the back porch, in the same rocking chair where Grandpa Franklin taught me to play chess when I was 7. The same hands that trembled when I read about my manipulative nature were the ones he held patiently as he explained to me that every move on the board had consequences. Think 3 moves ahead, Leo. Always 3 moves ahead. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Colleagues from the office, friends from college, even neighbors wanting to know if the story was true. Celeste's narrative was spreading like wildfire, and I could feel decades of reputation being eroded with every call. It was Martha, our former housekeeper, who brought the worst news. "Leo dear, they were here today." Celeste and a man she introduced as a private investigator had shown up at the house where I grew up, claiming they had a legal right to inspect the property that was in dispute. Martha, now 75, was intimidated and let them in. They photographed everything, Leo. Every room, every drawer they could open. They asked questions about your routines with Judge Cole, about how he treated you versus how he treated your mother when she called. When she mentioned that Celeste had taken several letters and documents from her grandfather's desk, something inside me changed fundamentally. It was no longer about money. It was no longer about inheritance. It was about protecting the memory of the only people who loved me unconditionally from someone who appeared out of nowhere to rewrite our history. That night, I sat in the leather armchair where Franklin used to read case law and made the decision that would change everything. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Detective Morrison? This is Leo Wright. Remember me from law school? I need a favor. A big favor." Morrison had specialized in corporate financial investigations after graduating. If Celeste wanted a war of narratives, she would get one. But she had no idea what kind of arsenal I had developed during my career. Because while she was building her story of an abandoned mother, I had spent the last 5 years suing people just like her. People who appeared out of nowhere claiming family rights to substantial inheritances. I knew all the tricks. I knew all the patterns. And most importantly, I knew exactly how to uncover what they were hiding. "Morrison, I need you to do a full investigation on Celeste Wright. Financial history, criminal background, relationship patterns, any previous lawsuits. Everything. Leo, that's going to cost about $5,000 to do right. Do it for $10,000. I want it to be flawless." While she slept in Miami, probably dreaming of $4 million, I was putting together an operation that would reveal every scheme, every lie, every manipulation she had perpetrated over the last 30 years. If you're following this war between mother and son, subscribe to the channel because the truth about Celeste Wright was about to come out in a way she could never have anticipated. Because during all those years while she completely ignored me, I became exactly the kind of person she should fear, a lawyer specializing in destroying fraudulent family inheritance cases. And when she discovered what kind of information I had access to through my professional contacts, when she saw that her own media campaign had only given me the final motivation to use all the resources at my disposal, it would be too late to back down. The battle was just beginning. And unlike her, I knew exactly how these wars ended. Especially when one side had spent 3 decades collecting the right weapons for this particular fight. Morrison's call came on Friday, 3 days before the preliminary hearing. "Leo, you need to sit down for this. Celeste Wright isn't just an opportunistic mother. She's a professional." I opened my laptop as Morrison spoke, connecting our video call. His screen showed a meticulously organized presentation with photos, documents, and a timeline spanning 15 years. Starting with the last decade, Morrison clicked on the first slide. 3 contested inheritance cases. 2 against distant uncles in Florida, 1 against her own mother in Tampa. Identical pattern in all, reappears in people's lives after years of absence claiming family rights. The photo of Celeste on the screen showed a woman different from the one who had cried in the newspaper. She was on a yacht in Miami, wearing expensive jewelry, next to an older man I didn't recognize. That's Douglas Patterson, her 3rd husband. He died of a heart attack in 2018, leaving an inheritance of $1.5 million. Celeste contested the will, claiming that his daughter had manipulated her father. "Let me guess," I interrupted. "She lost." Worse. They found out she was forging medical documents to prove senile dementia. She was almost arrested for document fraud. Morrison moved on to the next slide, showing bank documents that made my blood run cold. "Leo, remember the $3,200 a month your grandfather sent? She used that money as a down payment for fraudulent investment schemes. Pyramid schemes, fake cryptocurrencies, anything that promised a quick return." The evidence piled up on the screen, bank statements showing regular deposits of my grandfather's money being immediately transferred to offshore accounts, records of shell companies, documents from lawsuits where investors accused her of fraud. In 2020, she convinced 17 Florida retirees to invest their savings in a non-existent solar panel company. She ran off with $400,000. I felt a cold satisfaction growing in my chest. It wasn't just about family abandonment. Celeste Wright was a professional criminal who saw inheritances as business opportunities. Morrison, do you have enough evidence for criminal charges? Leo, I have enough evidence to send her to jail for a decade. But you said you wanted legal justice, not criminal justice. He was right. Sending her to prison would be gratifying, but it wouldn't protect my grandfather's memory or resolve the narrative she had planted in the media about my alleged manipulation. I needed something more elegant. Something that would use the very legal system she was trying to exploit against her. Morrison, I want you to do something specific. Track every penny my grandfather sent her over 22 years. I want to know exactly how she spent every dollar. While he worked, I developed the strategy that would change everything. As an estate lawyer, I knew the law had a specific provision for cases like this, the doctrine of unworthiness of inheritance. If an heir commits crimes against the estate or against the deceased, they can be declared unworthy of inheriting. But I didn't just want to block her inheritance. I wanted something more devastating. On Saturday afternoon, I called an old college friend who now worked as a federal prosecutor. James, I need a favor. I'm dealing with a case of inheritance fraud that may have federal ramifications. Leo, you know I can't interfere in state civil cases. What if I told you that the person involved has a 15-year history of committing interstate fraud using inheritances as seed money? The silence on the other end lasted 10 seconds before he asked, "Send me everything." It was Sunday when Celeste made her fatal mistake. She called my cell phone directly. "Leo, honey, we need to talk. As a family." Her voice was different now. No longer the fake motherliness of the first message or the performative desperation of the interview. It was calculating, businesslike. "Listen, I know you're upset about this whole legal situation. But look, we can work this out between us. We don't have to go to court." I activated the phone's recorder. In Charleston, it was legal to record conversations when one party consented. "What do you have in mind, Celeste?" 50-50. $2 million each. You get the house, I get the bank accounts. No lawyers, no public fights, no more newspaper headlines. And why do you think I would accept that? Her laugh was cold, calculated. "Because, dear, I have things about your grandfather that you won't want to become public." If you're following this legal battle between mother and son, subscribe to the channel because the upcoming revelations will show how far a person will go for money. What kind of things, Celeste? Documents that show how he really treated his biological family. Letters where he threatens to cut off contact if I tried to see him. Evidence of how he systematically pushed me away from you. Every word was a perfectly calculated lie. But she didn't know I had Grandma June's original letters, returned unanswered. She didn't know I had phone records of decades of ignored attempts to contact him. "Leo, you have 48 hours to decide. After that, this information will become public." I hung up the phone and smiled for the first time in weeks. Celeste Wright had just committed recorded extortion. Over the next 2 days, I put together an operation that combined 3 decades of evidence with 15 years of documented crimes. Morrison finalized the financial report showing that she had used $92,800 of my grandfather's money to defraud elderly people. James confirmed that the FBI had enough interest to open a formal investigation. But the centerpiece of my strategy was yet to come. On Monday morning, an hour before the hearing, I got the call I had been waiting for. "Leo? This is Margaret Cole." My grandfather's eldest cousin, now 85, was the unofficial matriarch of the Cole family. Respected, influential, and owner of an impeccable memory spanning 3 decades of family history. "Margaret, thank you for returning my call. Darling, I read about this terrible situation in the newspaper. This woman is trying to tarnish Franklin's memory. Margaret, I need you to do something for me. Something that may be difficult. Anything for the family. I need you to come to court today and tell the truth about the last 30 years. About how Celeste really treated our family." Her silence lasted only a moment. "I'll be there in an hour." As I drove to court, I mentally reviewed every element of the strategy. It was no longer about defending an inheritance. It was about exposing a professional criminal who had turned family abandonment into a business model. Celeste thought she was dealing with an orphaned grandson traumatized by the loss of his grandfather. She had no idea she was facing a lawyer who had spent 5 years studying people just like her. And when she found out that her own extortion call would be played in court, when she saw the evidence of 15 years of fraud being presented, when she realized that the FBI was already investigating her previous crimes, it would be too late for any negotiation. The war had begun the moment she decided to attack the memory of the man who raised me. But victory would be defined by the difference between someone who studied family abandonment as personal trauma and someone who turned that knowledge into lethal expertise. I parked in front of the courthouse and walked toward the marble steps where, 30 years ago, my grandfather first brought me to show me where justice lived. Today, at last, I would find out if he was right. The courtroom was packed when I arrived. Journalists, onlookers, and even a few fellow attorneys who had come to watch what promised to be an interesting probate case. Celeste sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a conservative black suit and discreet makeup, clearly instructed by her attorneys to look like a grieving mother seeking justice. Gavin sat beside her, nervous, adjusting his tie every few minutes. When our eyes met, she gave me a fake motherly smile, as if we were at a normal family reunion rather than a legal battle that would determine whether a professional criminal could steal $4 million using family abandonment as a strategy. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Avery," announced the bailiff. Richard Dale, Celeste's lawyer, began his opening statement with the same theatrical performance I had expected. He painted my grandfather as a manipulative and controlling man who used an innocent child to emotionally blackmail the biological parents. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Dale gestured dramatically, "this case is about a man who emotionally kidnapped a child from her rightful parents and spent 3 decades turning her against her own family." Every word was a calculated lie, but I remained impassive. Amelia Santos had taught me that the first rule of court was to never show your hand before the right moment. "The defense will argue that the Wrights voluntarily abandoned their daughter," Dale continued, "but the evidence will show a systematic pattern of parental alienation perpetrated by the late Judge Cole." When my turn came, Amelia rose with the calmness of someone who carries 3 decades of experience and 2 briefcases full of devastating evidence. "Your Honor, my client does not need to allege family abandonment. He can prove it." She opened the first folder, pulling out a stack of bank documents. For 22 years, Judge Franklin Cole sent $3,200 a month to the plaintiffs. $92,800 in total. Not once did the Wrights miss a deposit. Not once did they ask how the child they claimed to have been prevented from seeing was doing. Dale stood up quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant to the issue of undue influence." Overruled. "Continue, Ms. Santos." Amelia smiled, opening the second folder. "These are letters sent by Judge Cole's wife, June, over 30 years. Invitations to birthdays, graduations, holidays. All returned marked moved, address unknown, even when sent to addresses where the Wrights deposited checks that same week." The murmur in the courtroom grew as Amelia displayed the yellowed letters, each with a postmark and notes from June desperately trying to keep in touch with the daughter who had abandoned her own baby. It was when Margaret Cole entered the courtroom that the atmosphere changed completely. At 85, the matriarch of the Cole family walked with dignity, leaning on an ornate cane. As she passed the plaintiff's table, she looked directly at Celeste with an expression that could freeze water. "Dr. Santos," Judge Avery said, "the defense may call its next witness." The defense calls Margaret Cole. Margaret approached the witness stand with the authority of someone who had witnessed 8 decades of family history. When she swore to tell the truth, her voice echoed clearly through the courtroom. "Ms. Cole," Amelia began respectfully, "did you know Celeste Wright during the years she was involved with the Cole family?" "I did. Briefly. Before she abandoned her 6-month-old baby and disappeared for 3 decades. Dale jumped out of his chair. "Objection. Leading characterization. Sustained. The witness must stick to the facts." Margaret nodded calmly. "The facts, Your Honor, are that Celeste Wright showed up at my cousin Franklin's house in December 1991, pregnant and with nowhere to stay. June and Franklin took her in, arranged for medical care, prepared a room for her and the baby." Her voice hardened slightly. 6 months after Leo was born, we found a note on the kitchen table. "I can't do this. Take care of him. We haven't seen her since. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Celeste had lowered her head, pretending to be emotional, but I could see her fingernails digging into the table. Ms. Cole, Amelia continued, during those 30 years, was there any attempt by Ms. Wright to establish contact with her son? 1. In 2005, she showed up asking for money to get out of a gambling debt. Franklin gave her $5,000 and asked her to visit Leo. She took the money and never came back. That's when Amelia played her final card. Your Honor, I would like to play a recording of a phone call made by the plaintiff to my client 3 days ago. Dale jumped up as if he had been electrocuted. Objection. There was no prior discovery of this evidence. Your Honor, Amelia replied calmly, this recording was legally obtained by my client, who consented to the recording in accordance with South Carolina law. It is direct evidence of extortion. Play the recording. Celeste's voice filled the courtroom, every word of her blackmail attempt echoing through the speakers. The part about having compromising information about my grandfather, about giving me 48 hours to accept her offer, about making the information public if I didn't cooperate. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Celeste was pale, finally realizing that she had just heard her own voice committing extortion recorded and played back in open court. But I wasn't finished. Your Honor, I stood up for the first time. I would like to present additional evidence obtained through licensed private investigation into the petitioner's history. Amelia opened the third folder, removing Morrison's report. Over the past 15 years, Celeste Wright has contested 5 different wills. In 3 cases, she was found to have forged documents. In 2 cases, she was charged with elder fraud. She systematically used the $3,200 per month sent by Judge Cole as seed money for fraudulent investment schemes that defrauded 17 Florida retirees out of more than $400,000. Dale was desperate now. Objection. Irrelevant. Prejudicial. Your Honor, I replied, this pattern establishes that the petitioner is a professional fraudster who uses family rights claims to attack inheritances. It is directly relevant to her credibility and motivations in this case. Overruled. Continue. That's when I saw the exact moment Celeste realized she had lost everything. It wasn't when I presented the financial evidence. It wasn't when we replayed her extortion attempt. It was when Amelia showed the last piece, a letter found in my grandfather's desk, sealed and addressed to me, with instructions to be opened only in the event that someone contested his will. Amelia read the letter aloud. Leo, if you are hearing this, it means that someone is trying to steal what we built together. I want you to know that every penny I sent to Celeste was documented as charity for a lost daughter, not as an obligation to a mother. You have been my true heir since the day she abandoned you. You have been my family since the first moment you smiled at me. And anyone who tries to question that has never understood the true meaning of the word family. When Amelia finished reading, Celeste was crying. But they weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of someone who finally understood that she had bet on a battle that was lost before it even began. Because during all those years while she was building her career as a professional fraudster, I became exactly the kind of adversary she should have feared, someone who turned personal abandonment into lethal expertise. And when Judge Avery's gavel came down declaring the will valid and ordering her to pay my legal fees for frivolous litigation, I finally understood what my grandfather meant about justice. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting what really matters from people who confuse opportunity with entitlement. But the real twist was yet to come. The consequences for Celeste Wright began even before we left the courthouse. While Amelia organized the victory documents, I watched my biological mother try to escape through the back of the building, avoiding the reporters who now wanted to know about her career as a professional fraudster. The Charleston Herald, the same newspaper that had published her tearful story about being a desperate mother, now carried a very different headline: Professional Fraudster Exposed in Court. The federal investigation James had initiated moved quickly. Within 48 hours, federal agents were in Miami executing search warrants on the apartment she shared with her 4th husband. $400,000 in interstate fraud had caught the attention of federal prosecutors in a way she had never anticipated. Gavin, my biological father, disappeared completely. According to Morrison, he boarded a flight to Canada the night of the hearing, leaving Celeste to face the legal consequences of 3 decades of financial crimes alone. But the real consequences went far beyond the judicial system. Douglas Patterson Jr., the son of the third husband Celeste had tried to defraud in 2018, contacted me a week after the trial. He had watched all the media coverage and wanted to thank me for exposing the criminal pattern that had destroyed his father's memory. Leo, she almost convinced the world that Dad had lost his mind in his later years. Your victory validated everything we tried to prove about her. It was through Douglas that I discovered the true extent of Celeste's criminal career. She had not attacked only 5 families, as Morrison had initially discovered. There were 17 documented cases of elderly people she had manipulated, blackmailed, or defrauded over 2 decades. Each family began contacting me, sharing their own stories of how Celeste had appeared in their lives pretending to be a distant relative in need, a friend of a deceased family member, or a professional offering elder care services. Margaret Cole, the matriarch of the family who had testified in court, organized a meeting at my grandfather's house 3 weeks after the trial. Dozens of people showed up, not just members of the Cole family, but also neighbors, colleagues from the court where Franklin worked, and friends of Grandma June. Leo, Margaret said, holding my hands in her 85-year-old hands, your grandfather would be proud not only that you defended the inheritance, but how you protected the truth about who he really was. It was at that meeting that I understood something fundamental. The battle had never been about money. It had been about protecting the narrative of the family that raised me against someone who was trying to rewrite history for his own benefit. In the months that followed, I used the estate's resources in a way that I know Franklin would have approved of. I established a legal fund for families who were victims of estate fraud, offering free representation to people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers when opportunistic relatives attacked legitimate inheritances. The first case I took on was that of a 70-year-old woman whose own children were trying to have her declared mentally incompetent so they could control her property. It was the same tactic Celeste had tried to use against my grandfather. The victory was devastating for the greedy children and set a legal precedent that protects seniors from fraudulent family manipulation in South Carolina. 2 years after the trial, I received a call I never expected. Mr. Wright, this is the governor's assistant. The governor would like to know if you would be interested in being considered for a position as a state judge. At 34, I became the youngest judge in South Carolina history. My first major case was exactly what you would expect, an inheritance dispute involving a woman who claimed she had been manipulated by her father into changing his will in favor of her younger sister. Sitting behind the bench, wearing the robe my grandfather would have been proud to see me in, I heard a familiar story of allegations of undue influence, elder manipulation, and neglected family rights. The difference was that now I was on the side of justice with the power to protect real families from opportunistic predators. The woman suing her younger sister had followed exactly the same pattern as Celeste. Years of absence followed by sudden claims to family rights when money was involved. Ms. Davidson, I said to the plaintiff, this court will carefully examine the evidence from both sides. But I want to make it clear from the outset, presence is more important than biology. Whoever stands by someone through decades of ordinary life establishes family rights that cannot be revoked by last-minute allegations. The case was quickly resolved when evidence showed that the younger sister had been the sole caregiver for their father during the last 15 years of his life, while the petitioner had maintained contact only through annual Christmas cards. Justice for the family that truly deserved it. 3 years after the trial that changed my life, I visited my grandparents' grave on a cold November morning. I brought red hibiscus flowers that still bloom in the garden they planted, and the first printed copy of the book I was writing about inheritance law and protection against family fraud. I protected what you built, I whispered to the marble headstones. And now I'm building on that foundation. The book True Family, Protecting Inheritances from Family Predators, would be published the following year by the University of South Carolina Press, becoming required reading in family law courses in 12 states. More important than any academic recognition, the book included Celeste Wright's complete story as a case study, ensuring that future generations of lawyers would know how to identify and combat exactly this type of family predator. Last week, I received a letter from the federal prison where Celeste is serving an 8-year sentence for interstate fraud. She asked to visit me, claiming she wanted to reconcile with her son and explain her perspective on our family history. I put the letter in a drawer without responding. Some people never understand the difference between consequences and injustice. Celeste still believes she is a victim of circumstances, not the architect of her own choices. But her choices had consequences that extend far beyond her. The 17 families she defrauded over the years now have specialized attorneys helping them recover what they lost. The legal fund I established has already prosecuted 43 similar cases, protecting legitimate inheritances totaling more than $20 million. Each victory is a validation of the principle my grandfather taught me: family is defined by who stays, not by who shares DNA. During my years as a judge, I presided over hundreds of family cases. Complicated divorces, custody disputes, will contests. In each situation, I apply the same logic: evidence of presence and care outweighs claims of abstract biological or legal rights. If you followed this story of abandonment, manipulation, and justice to the end, subscribe to the channel, because stories like this show that sometimes the system works exactly as it should. When the truth is protected and justice prevails over opportunism. People ask if I feel anger toward Celeste Wright. The honest answer is that I feel gratitude. Without her abandonment, I would never have been raised by Franklin and June Cole. I would never have learned the values that shaped me into the man and judge I am today. I would never have developed the legal expertise I now use to protect other families from predators just like her. Without her pathetic attempt to steal an inheritance she didn't deserve, I would never have discovered my true calling: using the legal system to protect the vulnerable from opportunists. Last week, a family sent me a photo. 3 generations gathered for the birthday of the matriarch, a 90-year-old woman who nearly lost her estate to greedy grandchildren before our office intervened. The caption on the photo read, "Thank you for keeping our family together." That is the real inheritance my grandfather left me. Not $4 million, but the understanding that justice is an active verb, not an abstract concept. Celeste Wright tried to destroy me to steal what was never rightfully hers. Instead, she inadvertently made me the best-equipped person in the world to prevent other family predators from doing to other families what she tried to do to mine. The last I heard, she was still in federal prison, serving a sentence that will extend for the next 5 years. Me? Well, I just got confirmed for a second decade as a state judge. And every morning when I sit behind the bench where my grandfather would have been proud to see me, I remember that true family isn't determined by who abandons you. It's defined by who chooses to stay when leaving would be easier.